Hi, it's Will from StormTheCastle.com, and this is part 2 of my knife making tutorial. The method of making a knife by stock removal. This way you don't have to forge, hammer, and anvil the blade. And this part, we finish off the knife. We make and attach the handle. Came out pretty good. We finish off that blade. We harden and temper it in a heat source. I use my homemade forge, my backyard forge. You don't necessarily have to use a forge. You can actually harden and temper the blade with a torch. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I will show you the whole process. So in this part of the tutorial, we finish off the knife. If you are directly watching this video, I'll put a link here to the part 1 if you want to go see that. So, nice knife, let's launch into the tutorial.
Okay, let's select ourselves some wood for the handle. I like to work on the handle, most of the handle, before I actually harden and temper the blade. It's just safer for the blade and safer so you don't get cut. So I have a 1-inch thick piece of burl wood here. This is Amboina burl. It has a beautiful grain to it. And I will be slicing it in half. But lay out your knife tang, the handle part on your wood, and mark it off. And we're going to be cutting out most of this, but we're not going to cut it to the exact dimension right away. That's something that comes with time as we're working it. So mark off the handle, and then use whatever tools you want to cut the rough outline of the handle. Now I've also split it in half here. Each half is about 1/2 inch thick. So that was an inch thick piece of wood. Now clamp it down and drill out your handle. Same size hole. And you do this, of course, on both. You can see I have one done there already. Now we're going to assemble the blade, the handle onto the blade, just temporarily so we can work on it. So put it together and pin it. And this doesn't have to be a terrific pinning. It can just be a snug pinning. You don't want it to be too hard of a fit, because we're going to be removing this pin later, these pins. And I'm just using dowel that I sanded down a little bit so it'd be a reasonable fit. And there we go. Now notice how the handle is bigger than all of the blade. See? There's extra there. So now let's start working on that handle shape. Use whatever tools that you're comfortable with. I used a belt sander to get some rough work, and if you have the larger belt sander, it works even better. And then I did a lot of work with the wood rasp. So take your time, get nice form on this. Start to get it right down to almost exactly where it's going to end. And then for some fine work, I did sandpapering. Now this handle is just about done. I've left myself just a little bit of leeway so we could finish it off later. So let's crank up the forge. The first thing we do is we're going to harden this blade. Hardening it brings it up to about 1450, 1500 degrees. So crank up the forge. And you can do this with a torch, one of those plumber's torches. So put the blade in your heat and start to heat it. Now notice I have a poker in the fire too. That's important because we get that poker up the temperature, and then we use it to heat up our oil. Now this is just old motor oil that I have in a bucket. So warm that motor oil up. We are going to actually freeze once we get our blade up to temperature, we dip it in that oil to lock it in so it stays. So now to know you're up to temperature, you're going to be about 1450 to 1500 degrees. That blade is going to get red-orange. And how to know where it's the right temperature is to use a magnet on it. See how I've just tested it with a magnet? It's starting to get close. When a magnet no longer sticks to it, nice red-orange color, the magnet no longer sticks, you're at the right temperature. Now you can quench it in the oil. And I've got a lot of differing opinions on this, but I like to swirl it around in the oil because then it doesn't form a temperature bond of hot oil where the blade is. Moving it around like that gets the temperature right. So there we go. Now that's hardened. Now if you hear the sound, I'm going to put the sound in here. The blade has a nice glassy sound to it compared to the handle here. You can tell the difference, and that's where you know you've got it hardened. Now let's clean off that blade. Just some sandpaper or some emery paper, because next we're going to temper the blade. So we harden, and now we're going to actually soften it back up some. Now notice how I've got the blade placed here, with the back end of the blade near the fire, but not in the fire. We're going to bring up this blade to between 450 and about 590, maybe 600 degrees here, and it's important. The 450 is where the cutting edge is, and the 600 degrees is where the back of the blade is. And you can notice the difference because it'll be a dark blue in the back like this, and a straw color on the blade, on the edge. So that softens up the back more than the front. It keeps the hardness on the edge of the blade, but softens up the back some, which is perfect. So get a nice plum bluish, dark blue color on the back, where the cutting edge is not, and a nice straw color on the blade. Now you got to take your time with this, and feel free to move that around in the fire, and then once you've got that, quench it, and it locks in. So now this blade is tempered. Terrific. Now let's finish it off. Now I used a series of emery papers on this to get a polish out of my blade. It started out with 100 grit, and I worked my way all the way up to 600 grit. So I did 100, 220, I think I did 320, I did 400, and then I did 600. So continuously go through those grits, polishing both sides of the blade until you get a nice shine on that. So now let's apply the handle. Clean up the handle with something like an acetone. And I'll make it nice and clean, because so the glue will attach to it really well. Now see I have my handles. Now, you might want to finish off those edges right there, sandpaper them up really nice, and you could even apply some tung oil to them if you wanted to now, because once it's on the blade, it's difficult to work on these little sections without scarring the blade. So, rough up the insides of those handles so the glue takes well, just like this. Mix together your epoxy. I use a nice epoxy. I use Gorilla Glue here. And most people recommend a 30-minute epoxy. I'm fine with a 5-minute epoxy. You got plenty of time. If you've done it before, you're comfortable with it. 5-minute epoxy. You know, mix it up really well. Apply it to both handles, insides of both handles, halves. Nice even coat, fairly thick. Now, pin it. Pin both halves of your blade right down, both halves of your handle right down to your blade. Nice snug fit. Now you can trim those if they're too big. Of course, you trim them. And there we go. Now, clamp it down, but don't clamp on the pins because they could prevent it actually from clamping tight. Clamp away from the pins. And as you're doing this, clean up any excess. It'll make it easier in the next step. Glue is going to ooze out. Clean all of that up as much as you can. And once it dries, clean it up really good. And then use chemicals if you need to. And use sandpaper to clean it all up. Now do your final sanding. If you have to, use a rasp, but be careful. Do plenty of sanding to get that handle into its final configuration. Exactly the way you want it. Feel it, see what feels good in your hand, and whatnot. I didn't have to do too much sanding here because I did most of my work already. So let's coat it. I'm using a tung oil. You can use linseed oil too. Give it a nice coat of tung oil on your complete handle. once that tung oil dries, soaks in nicely, scuff it up with some fine grit sandpaper, and then apply another coat of tung oil. And you can apply more coats. It'll give you a richer and thicker look. You can sand some more, scuff some more, apply more tung oil, and it'll give you really a nice rich look. Okay, that's just about it. Sharpen up your knife. And there we go. Our completed knife. Congratulations. Nice job. There is part 1 of this tutorial. The link is coming shortly. And there's more blacksmithing stuff. And lots more projects on my website at stormthecastle.com. And I will be doing a tutorial on how to forge a knife. That's where you use a billet, a piece of steel, and you actually forge out the knife shape. Thanks for watching. Good luck. And if you make a knife using my method, send me a picture.